A story begins in a quiet, dimly lit restaurant. The atmosphere is calm, with a warm scent of pizza and garlic lingering in the air. Ethan, a young waiter in his mid-20s, moves between tables with ease, his demeanor casual and lighthearted. He's used to the regular flow of customers, smiling and chatting with them as he serves. The restaurant hums with soft chatter, clinking silverware, and the occasional laughter of patrons. Everything seems ordinary. Enter Mr. Thompson, an elderly man in his late 70s, whose appearance catches Ethan's eye. His clothes are worn, but neat, and he walks slowly with deliberate steps, his eyes scanning the room as though looking for something. Ethan barely looks up as he guides the old man to a corner table by the window. As Mr. Thompson settles in, he glances around the room, seemingly lost in thought. Ethan quickly takes his order, but with a barely audible sigh, mutters to a colleague about the man's age and how he doesn't seem fit for a night out. Ethan chuckles lightly at the old man's expense, dismissing him as just another regular customer. The tone is light, almost dismissive. However, as Ethan leaves to place the order, the mood subtly shifts. The warmth of the kitchen contrasts with the coldness of Mr. Thompson's solitary figure by the window, and the strange quiet around him starts to feel more unsettling. Ethan returns to Mr. Thompson's table with the food, his earlier dismissiveness slowly fading as he notices the old man's odd behavior. Mr. Thompson's hands tremble as he reaches for his fork, his movement slow and deliberate. Ethan thinks nothing of it at first, assuming it's simply a sign of old age, but there's something in the old man's gaze, something distant and haunting, that catches Ethan's attention. As Ethan sets the plate down, he can't help but notice Mr. Thompson's solemn expression. The elderly man stares out the window, his eyes clouded with a sadness that's hard to place. Ethan glances at his watch, ready to move on to his next task, but something about the scene stops him. He looks at Mr. Thompson again. The old man seems lost in his own world, the weight of his thoughts more visible now. The calm atmosphere of the restaurant feels strangely suffocating. Ethan shakes off the discomfort, but curiosity gnaws at him. He moves around the restaurant, but his eyes keep returning to Mr. Thompson, who doesn't appear to notice anyone else. The old man's gaze is fixed, almost mournful. When he finally looks up, his eyes briefly meet Ethan's, and in that moment, Ethan feels a wave of guilt for his earlier judgment. Ethan, feeling an unexpected pull of empathy, approaches Mr. Thompson's table once again. This time, he pauses before speaking. His voice softens as he asks if the old man is okay, noticing the distant, faraway look in his eyes. And Mr. Thompson hesitates, then slowly closes the menu in front of him, the faint tremor in his hands more pronounced now. For a moment, there's only the soft of the restaurant around them, and the weight of silence hangs heavy. With a slow, deliberate motion, Mr. Thompson pulls out a small, weathered photograph from his wallet. He looks at it tenderly before glancing up at Ethan. "This was my wife," he says quietly, his voice fragile. The photo is of a younger couple, smiling and holding hands, full of life and promise. "We used to come here together every year to celebrate our anniversary." Ethan feels a pang of regret for his earlier mockery. The mood of the scene shifts as he realizes that Mr. Thompson isn't just another lonely old man. He's carrying the weight of a deep personal loss. The quiet sorrow in the old man's voice is more powerful than any words Ethan could have imagined, but Mr. Thompson's eyes, clouded with grief, tell only part of the story. There's something unspoken, a deeper pain lurking just beneath the surface, as if the photograph is not just a memory but a reminder of something much darker. As Ethan stands there holding the moment with Mr. Thompson, the old man's voice wavers and he struggles to continue. After a long pause, Mr. Thompson looks at Ethan, his face clouded with pain. "She's gone, and I come here every day hoping." His words falter as he pauses, a lump rising in his throat. Ethan, feeling a heavy sense of empathy, leans in slightly, waiting for him to continue. Mr. Thompson takes a deep breath and begins to tell his story more clearly. His wife, Helen, had been ill for several years before passing away. They had always dreamed of visiting this restaurant, saving money for years just to be able to afford it, but Helen had never made it here. She passed away just before they could make that final visit. The old man comes to the restaurant alone now, sitting at the same table they would have shared, reliving the memories of the woman he loved. "This was supposed to be our place," he says, voice breaking. As he speaks, Ethan is struck by the quiet strength of the old man's grief. He didn't just lose his wife, he lost the future they had planned together. The old man's sadness is palpable, and Ethan begins to understand the weight of what it means to carry memories without hope of making new ones. Mr. Thompson's eyes flicker for a moment as if about to say more, but then he quickly looks away, unable to finish the thought. He reaches for his jacket, his movement slow and deliberate. And Mr. Thompson stands to leave. Ethan watches him with a growing sense of unease. The old man, now with his coat on, pauses at the door and turns around one last time. His face is etched with a quiet sorrow, but there's something more. Something he's holding back. "I wish she could have seen this place," Mr. Thompson says softly, his voice distant. But she wouldn't have liked what happened here." Ethan's curiosity intensifies. There's a cryptic edge to the old man's words, and they hang in the air like a mystery waiting to be unraveled. What does he mean? What could have happened in this restaurant that the old man would feel compelled to mention it now after all these years? Before Ethan can ask more, Mr. Thompson leaves, disappearing into the chilly night. Ethan feels a strange tug in his chest. He goes to the door, watching the figure of the old man slowly vanish down the street. Something doesn't sit right, and the more he thinks about it, the more questions pile up. Why would Mr. Thompson speak of his wife with such sadness and mention a hidden truth about the restaurant? The next day, Ethan returns to work, but the unease lingers. You can't shake the feeling that something from the past is influencing the present. He decides to do some digging, quietly asking around. One of the older servers mentions something about the tragic accident that happened in the restaurant years ago, but she doesn't elaborate. Ethan's mind races with questions as he arrives at the restaurant the next day, unable to shake the cryptic words Mr. Thompson left behind. As he moves through the day's routine, his curiosity only grows, driving him to dig deeper into the restaurant's past. He discreetly begins to ask around, speaking with the older employees, hoping to uncover any forgotten details. His persistence pays off when one of the veteran servers, Maria, reluctantly opens up about an event that happened years ago. Maria's voice lowers to a near whisper as she recounts the tragic incident. Several years before, a fire broke out in the kitchen late at night, claiming the life of a woman none other than Helen, Mr. Thompson's late wife. Maria reveals that Helen had been dining in the restaurant that night with her husband. Just before the fire started, there was a huge explosion in the kitchen, and while Mr. Thompson managed to escape, Helen was trapped inside. The restaurant was never quite the same after that night, with rumors swirling about how the fire may have been started intentionally. Ethan feels a cold chill creep down his spine. His mind connects the dots. Mr. Thompson's cryptic words about what happened here now make a terrifying sense. The old man's grief, the mysterious tone of his story, and now the tragic history of this very restaurant all collide into something far darker than he could have imagined. Ethan's newfound knowledge weighs heavily on him. The connection between Mr. Thompson's loss and the fire that claimed his wife's life is too much to ignore. Despite the unease gnawing at him, Ethan decides he must learn the full truth. He begins to dig into the restaurant's history, asking more questions and speaking to anyone who might know something. His inquiries start to make the other employees uncomfortable, and it's clear they are hiding something. As the days pass, strange things begin to happen. Ethan finds old records in the back office, but they're incomplete, with crucial pages missing. Late one night, he overhears a conversation between two managers, speaking in hushed tones about the fire and how it was never fully investigated. There's a mention of an accidental cause, but the guilt in their voices tells another story. Ethan's curiosity soon turns to suspicion. He starts to notice shadowy figures lurking around the restaurant, often when he stays late. Sometimes, when he's alone in the dining area, he hears faint footsteps echoing from the kitchen, but when he checks, no one is there. The more Ethan uncovers, the more he feels as if someone is deliberately trying to keep him from the truth. Ethan's sense of dread grows, but he pushes on, determined to uncover the full story. He begins to fear that he might be getting closer to something, or someone that wants these secrets to remain buried. Ethan's determination to uncover the truth reaches a breaking point. One evening, after another sleepless night spent poring over old files, he finds something that makes his blood run cold. A police report from the night of the fire. It's not just about the accident. It's about a cover-up. The report mentions a large sum of money paid to a fire investigator, followed by an abrupt change in the investigation's direction. The fire was ruled accidental, but Ethan's gut tells him it wasn't. Someone tampered with the evidence, and the restaurant's management was involved. As Ethan pieces together the fragments of the story, it becomes clear that Helen's death was no accident. The fire had been set intentionally to cover up something far more sinister. There were people at the restaurant who had wanted her gone, people who wanted to silence her. Ethan begins to suspect that the fire was a murder, and the perpetrators are still out there pulling strings to keep the truth hidden. The more Ethan uncovers, the more dangerous it becomes. Late at night, he receives a threatening message on his phone. Stop digging. The past is better left forgotten. When he arrives at the restaurant the next day, he notices a group of unfamiliar men sitting in the corner watching him closely. The tension is palpable. Ethan realizes that someone is onto him, and that his investigation might have just put him in the crosshairs of those who want the truth to stay buried.